All right, let's get started. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for the April installment of our monthly virtual workshop series. My name is Lane Shear, she, hers, and I am a program director with the Inclusive STEM Ecosystems for Equity and Diversity, ISEED, program at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Today, on behalf of our AAAS IU's initiative, I'd like to welcome you to today's workshop, Reforming Pedagogy for Data-Intensive STEM Courses, Putting the Student Experience at the Center. Today's workshop will feature presentations for Dr. Mine Dogucu and Dr. Kathleen Browne. Before we jump into the workshop, I have a couple housekeeping notes. This presentation is being recorded. The recording will be made available in the coming weeks on our website at aas-ius.org, and the slides are posted and available on the website if you'd like to follow along. You will also receive an email with a link to the recording when it's available. Please note, we will transition into the Q&A discussion breakouts following the presentations. These breakouts will allow for deeper engagement, and these will not be recorded. Additionally, we have closed captioning for this workshop. You can download and view the full transcript by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who are new to AAAS IUs, this initiative seeks to support faculty, students, and the greater undergraduate STEM community by disseminating research and knowledge about STEM teaching, learning, equity, and institutional transformation. We invite you to learn more about the AAAS IU's initiative on our website and hope you will join our community as future contributors. You can also follow us on X, Twitter, at IU's program, and LinkedIn to stay up to date on our latest events, blogs, or to share what you've learned at today's workshop. And now we will shift over for our first presentation of the day. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Mine Dogucu, Assistant Professor of Teaching and Vice Chair of Undergraduate Studies in the Department of Statistics at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Dogucu, over to you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. All right. I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate the diversity of fields represented and universities represented in the audience. I'm going to start my talk with sharing a few statistics about the workforce. And this is coming directly from the tech world. And I will keep talking a lot about data science students, instructors, and so forth today. But every time I say data science, please take it as any science student dealing with data. And this workforce statistics perhaps can be also extended to similar workforce as well. So when we look at data from Facebook, their employment statistics, we see that only 4.8% of the technical roles are held by Hispanic employees, 2.4% by Black employees, and 25.8% are women. And when we look at Google, we see and this is Google's US employees, 1.2% are Black women, 1.3% are Latina women, and 0.2% are Native American women. And when we look at Google's global employees, these are technical and non-technical roles, we see that only 6.5% of the respondents actually report having a disability, whereas World Health Organization estimates 16% of the world's population to experience significant disability. So when we look at disability, gender, or race statistics, obviously Google and Facebook and now Meta are not necessarily the descriptive of the data science workforce, but these are some statistics telling us about what the workforce looks like. And what happens when we have a workforce like this, it gets actually reflected in the tools that we create. This includes statistical translation tools. Google Translate is one example. For instance, I'm a native speaker of Turkish language. Turkish language is not a gendered language. We have the same word for he, she, it, which is o. But if you were to write "o doctor" in Google Translate, it used to, by default, translate to "he's a doctor." So this is one example of gendered tools. And facial recognition algorithms are also much less accurate in identifying women than men, and darker-skinned people than lighter-skinned people. And autonomous vehicles also have issues with recognizing behaviors of people with disabilities. These are just very few examples of how lack of diversity in the workforce gets reflected in the tools that are created by that workforce. And as data science educators, I think it's very important for us to create accessible and inclusive data-intensive courses. And we also have to prepare a future data workforce that is more diverse than it is today. So I'm going to tell some examples about teaching accessibly. This work is a collaboration with Dr. Johnson and Dr. Ott. And interestingly, actually, this came as as a result of us writing a Bayesian statistics book. And perhaps Bayesian statistics is an advanced level course, but the things I'm going to talk about, I think, can be extended to many data intensive courses. Even though our goal was writing a book, our initial idea about the goal, the primary goal of the book was writing a book that is accessible and inclusive. And I have linked to the book. I'm not going to talk about the book itself, but instead I'm going to talk about the framework that we have created for accessible and inclusive teaching materials for statistics and data science courses. And as I said, it can extend to many other scientific courses that teaches statistics and data science skills within their courses. So our first primary part of framework was providing everything open access. When we look at cost of book statistics and the barriers to accessing education for many students through textbooks, is quite high. And an estimate says that a four-year university student spent more than $1,200 in 2021. And about 11% of students indicated in the survey that they skipped meals in order to afford books and course materials. Given this, it's an absolute urgency when we talk about access and inclusion to talk about open access materials. And another responsibility that we have is not just our students who need to access our materials, but also in the global scientific community, we're not equal in terms of access to information. For instance, our book website has been accessed by people from more than 150 countries. And if you think about even forgetting the costs of this, but actually a physical material making its way to this many countries would not have been possible. And I'm going to talk about other parts of the framework, but first I want to introduce a term in case others may not be familiar, if it's not clear. I'm going to talk about assistive technologies. Assistive technology is any form of technology. It can be a software device that helps people with disabilities perform certain activities. Some examples can include walking sticks, wheelchairs, and screen readers. When we talk about screen reader, it's an assistive technology that supports blind or visually impaired people in using their computer. And blind and visually impaired people are not the only ones who rely on screen readers, but they are one population that do use it. So I'm going to show an example in case there are people who have never heard a screen reader. So the screen reader is going to read my website.
Navigation. Attention of currently. Short. Your length hair with green item stick. Image. List 7 items. Mind Dogucu. Visited. Link. Home. Link.
So the screen reader, if you could pay attention to it, was saying something along the lines of navigation, home, link, and it's reading the links. But before that, it was reading an image, actually. It said for image of a woman with a red lipstick, curly hair, and so forth. But in reality, all that website has is that image, it's my image. I have provided that description on the back end so that the screen reader can describe that image. So we call these alternate text, and if alternate text, or sometimes referred as alt text, describes contents of an image, and it's used in HTML pages and other products too, like PowerPoints, Google presentations. All of these have those. And screen readers cannot read images, but can read alternate text. If I did not provide the description, it would have read the image as image.png. So I had to provide that. When we started developing this accessible and inclusive framework for our data-intensive courses, one thing we realized is the tool we are using, R Markdown, did not support alternate text. So even if you wanted to, we couldn't. Some of you may be perhaps familiar with Jupyter Notebooks. R Markdown is similar to Jupyter Notebooks. Now we have Quarto. So at least our Markdown did not support this. So we actually asked our studio, the company that develops this, now posted, can you please support alternate text? And I'm happy to say they do now. But we thought alternate text was an important part of accessibility and inclusion. And of course, when we talk about data science or data intensive courses, making math accessible is a must for us. One question that becomes very important is, should calculus be prerequisite? And sometimes it's used as a gatekeeping course. Sometimes it's not, it's really needed, but this is a crucial question that we need to ask for our data science courses for sure. And when we talk about data intensive courses, one thing that becomes very important is probability. And since early childhood, humans develop intuition about probability, whether they're correct intuitions or not. And our students always come to class with these intuitions. So checking intuition early on becomes an important part of these courses. And active learning quizzes are one way of doing this. And now that computing has been more powerful than ever before, perhaps supporting mathematical concepts with computing is also one way of making math accessible. This really helps students, especially in more advanced classes, decode Greek letters all of a sudden into more solid aspects of computing. So switching from computing Greek letters to computing can make math a little bit more accessible. And another important aspect is making learning fun. So this is the beginning of our book. How can we live if we don't change? Because Bayesian statistics is all about change. And when we talk about accessibility and inclusion, actually not making students fear of statistics, math is one way of this inclusive step. And when we look at many more traditional books, instead of a Beyoncé lyric, perhaps what we are used to seeing is, what is probability? This is the beginning. Perhaps this is not the most fun. I mean, it's an important question, of course, to ask what is probability, but as a beginner, not the best icebreaker for the classroom or for a book. And another part of the framework we thought was embracing mistakes as part of learning. So this is a direct quote from us. As you read the book and put Bayesian methodology into practice, you will make mistakes, many mistakes. Making and learning from mistakes is simply part of learning. We hope that you persist through the struggle of learning so that you can contribute your unique insights, perspectives, and experiences to the Bayesian community. And I think this is a very important shift from a more traditional way of teaching of the proof is obvious, or the proof is clear, or the proof is left for the reader to see. In fact, sometimes the proof is not very clear and it is very challenging, and we will make mistakes when we are driving those proofs. And it's important for students to not think of scientists or more statisticians as these perfect human beings who can do everything so easily. No, scientists have their own struggles as well. And perhaps I left the easiest part of the framework to the last slide, not last slide of the half of the presentation, making learning relevant with diverse set of applications. This is rather easy when we are talking about data intensive classes because we have a lot of sources of data. For instance, giving again our book example, we have weather data, LGBTQ plus anti-discrimination laws, we have Spotify data, hotel bookings, penguins, which is a great ecological example. And not only it actually gets to the fun part because some students connect perhaps with Spotify data, some connect with ecological data more, but it is also showing diversity of questions scientists might be asking as well. So I think this is a rather powerful thing we have for data intensive classes. So I will now talk about teaching accessibility, which is a different to teaching accessibly. I mentioned that the tool we were using did not support alternate text. That tool is actually built on an R package called NetR. And many of you might be using it even without realizing if you're using Quarto, R Markdown, Distill, these kinds of tools. But to give you an overview, this tool was started development in October 2011. And it was available for wide download in October 2012. So this tool has been around and supporting other tools in a while. When we were writing the book, we requested this alternate text feature in 2020 July. And within 6 months, the company made it available. So the question here was not whether company knows how to support this. It was quite an easy fix, took 6 months. But it took somebody from scientific community, in this case it was us, 8 years to request this. So, and this tool is actually quite commonly used. Between 2012, October to July 2020, there were more than 22 million downloads of this tool. So scientists were creating reports, websites, all this without any alternate text support. So the problem here was developers create tools with no accessible support, and then data scientists create inaccessible products as a result of this. And when I say developer, actually the person who developed this tool is an amazing tool, and I love his work. He has a PhD in statistics. So as a statistics professor, I was like, the problem is us. we are letting people graduate with PhDs. So it's the curriculum that does not teach accessibility to our students that results in inaccessible products. So luckily, I was supported by 2 grants around the same time. One was Teach Access, which was helping me think about how to teach accessibility to students, but I also had an NSF support, which was making me build and revise my Introduction to Data Science course. So I thought this topic has to be at an introductory level for many reasons. And with my collaborator, Juyang So, we've developed a few things. The course, again, is open access. You can check out the course materials, but I will give few examples. So this was our goal for a curriculum goal. As educators, we have to ensure that the current and the next generation of data scientists provide public-facing outputs. This can be websites, analysis reports, whatever they're creating that are accessible. Hopefully, we will even get to manuscripts being accessible. I'm less hopeful about that currently, but we'll see. So our learning objectives were this. Students should get familiar with Americans with Disabilities Act, or known as ADA. And in case there's anybody in the audience, you may, who's not from the United States, if you're teaching outside of US context, you might also consider United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as an option. And students should use at least one assistive technology. Screen reader is an easy one to use in the classroom, mainly because Windows and Mac systems, and possibly Linux, I'm not sure, they already come with screen readers built in. So whether students are already using or not, they can try to use screen reader. And students should consider different representations of data. If you look at these learning objectives, the first 2 have nothing to do with data science. This is just students' general idea of knowledge of accessibility. The third one is specific to data science, so I'm going to delve deeper into what we mean by different representations of data. So often, the one representation of data we teach is data visualization. It's almost the default representation of data. So here in this visualization, I'm showing a plot that has information on 3 species of penguins, Adelie, Chinstrap, and Gentoo. It definitely uses color. Color is one aesthetic we use in visualizations, but it's not necessarily accessible to colorblind people. So these are the default colors I'm using from R's ggplot package, ggplot2 package. But you might realize I have also, when making scatter plot, I have also added triangles, squares, in addition to dots to make it more distinguishable. And also I divided the scatter plot into 3 to show each species separately rather than providing them in one plot. So there are different ways to make that distinction in addition to color. One thing that we teach to our students is color blindness simulator. If the students doesn't have color blindness, they can actually test how a colorblind person would see a plot. So this is the same plot that I've shown previously in 4 different color blindness simulations. Whether it's red week or green week and so forth, students can see the distinction. And perhaps the first plot is very clear that colors are not easily distinguishable. And luckily, one thing we teach in exchange of this bad default color choices is the Okaba Ito color palette, which is known in the literature as the color Flannery color palette. So these are the hex codes for these colors. And once switching to Okaba Ito color palette, this is how the visualization would be updated. I have provided few links in my slides in case people are not using R. You can still use color blindness simulators and teach them to your students using online tools. And I have the original paper linked if anybody would like to read it, and the color codes linked as well. Data visualization is one way that we ask students to represent data. Another one is verbalization. We can verbalize data by utilizing alternate text. So here, what we are seeing is a scatter plot, and below we are actually seeing a figure caption. Often we describe plots in figure captions, but the figure captions are very brief descriptions of plots. So here, the figure caption says the speed of cars and the distances taken to stop. But it doesn't tell anyone if somebody is blind or visually impaired. It doesn't say anything at all about what that relationship looks like. So instead, I'm giving this, as I said, alternate text can be used in PowerPoint, even anywhere. I'm just showing it as an R example that there's a difference between figure caption and figure alternate text. Here, I have written on the back end a figure alternate text. The scatter plot shows speed ranging from 0 to 25 miles per hour on the x-axis, and dist ranging from 0 to 120 feet on the y-axis. There is a moderate positive linear relationship. And this is very important because it does talk about the relationship as well as talking about the ranges of the x and y axis as well as the variables on those axes. And it says it's a scatter plot. So I don't have time to talk about best practices for writing alternate text, but there are two commonly used recommendations. One is by Cecil and the other one is Canella and Hare. I would highly recommend for anyone interested in teaching these to check out these links. And we know one thing from the study of Canella and Hare, they looked at Tidy Tuesday community, which is a community every Tuesday, they tweet visualizations, and they have seen that only 3% of the visualizations had alternate text. So we know for sure we have to teach alternate text to our students. The community does not describe their plots for those who rely on screen readers. In addition to verbalization, data sonification is another one. So here I have a scatter plot, and the scatter plot has X and Y values as 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. I'm going to play this data as sound for those who are able to hear. So visualization, verbalization, and then sonification. So students should be able to see that data can also be represented as sound. I don't have a link here, but for anyone who is teaching with SAS, SAS has a great data sonification examples on their accessibility website. It's amazing. And another way to represent data is through tactualization. I'm going to show a video of how a box plot is turned into a tactile format. So here we have a box plot printed on paper, and my collaborator, Dr. Seo, he's going to swell the ink using a swell machine. And it may not make sense at this point, but it is going to make sense in a few seconds. So now coming out of the swell machine, that graph, this box plot has become 3D. So Dr. Seo is able to actually touch it. It's in tactile format. So you can touch the whiskers, can touch the dots, the outliers, potential outliers as well. So you can see really how it's 3D. But tactile representations are very important, especially for blind and visually impaired to represent data. And I'll give one example about tactile representation in R. There are ways where plots, at least this is the one we teach, plots can directly be the axes, titles of these plots can be changed to Braille language. So when they are actually printed through the swell machine, they can be totally in tactile format and very useful format. But the idea here is for students not to think data visualization as the only way to represent data, that there are other ways. And because we're doing this introduction to data science to students, we thought this was a good way to introduce about accessibility. Of course, this is not the only way to introduce accessibility to data science students. And I think especially those of who are teaching dashboards, data dashboards, maybe you may consider more on motor accessibility because dashboard has to be navigated with keyboards. But we talk a little bit more on our limitations in our manuscript if anybody's interested. And I'll end my talk with a reminder that accessibility is for everyone. It's not just for disabled folks, for anyone who actually opens the doors automatically or who uses the caption when not understanding my accent, perhaps. This is really for everyone, not for only disabled people. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dogucu. That was a fantastic talk, and I really underlining that accessibility is for everyone, I think is such an important point. Now I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Kathleen Browne, Associate Professor Emerit and Adjunct Instructor at the Department of Geological, Environmental and Marine Sciences and Earth and Chemical Sciences at Rider University, who is retired, but is serving as a guest instructor over at Rider. So over to you, Kathy.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many people here. So I'm here with two of my co-PIs for an IUS grant, and we're going to present a little bit of background about our grant and show you some of our preliminary results. And our goal is also to share resources that we've been developing. So Andrea Druas is here. She's our learning scientist, and Saj Lichtenwallner is here, who is our data literacy expert. I come as a geologist by training and as an instructor as part of this grant in oceanography introductory courses. So I'll give you a little bit of background, including the origins of the project, some results, and you'll have access to our resources. We need to acknowledge that we've each been influenced by prior experiences that have been significant in their own way and have influenced what we are doing in this project. And so there are numerous here. I've included the links as well. The data that you'll see that we use with our students come in part from the Oceanographic Observations Initiative, another NSF, a large NSF-funded project. And I'll share some other resource locations, I guess I can say, at the end as well, that includes the EDI modules, et cetera. And must say thank you to our students who are sort of our experimental, we use them as our experiments, right, to figure out how to instruct students even better. So this is my quick outline for background. I'm going to do this with a little more illustration, I guess. So 31 years ago, I started as a faculty member at Rider, and I taught a class of 109 students oceanography, and in their exams, I asked them questions like why for their essay exams. And I just wasn't satisfied with some or much of the results. And I thought, well, maybe the question isn't right. So then I'd rephrased it to explain why, thinking they would know what explain means. And then I'd say why, and please explain your answers. And this is in subsequent semesters, I tried to give them more information about what I was looking for, right? And including how much you should be answering kind of thing. And it still wasn't working for me. And so clearly, I think the issue was my attempt to try and pull out their knowledge and their understanding with a composition of my questions, at least, and potentially my instructions. So what occurred to me eventually is that if the students could tell me why they're not performing, at least the way I'd prefer, that they might say, well, we don't really know what's in an explanation, right? So what do you mean by that? And maybe it's different in different disciplines. So along the way, I started working with K-12 teachers to provide professional development around different science topics, and thus became familiar with the next generation science standards. And lo and behold, the black box was sort of opened in a way. When I saw it, I said, of course, right? So this is a part of a rubric, essentially, or part of the standards that sort of teases out the parts of scientific explanation, and resources were developed to help instructors figure out how to assess students' explanations. So this is an example of a rubric for K through 12 work. And what I love about my entire career is that when I have aha moments, when I'm looking at in and learning about another discipline aside from the one that I've been trained in. And usually it results in, oh, well, that explains this because I didn't know that, or et cetera. So the K through 12 work was really informative for me. So I tried having students use evidence in particular, and here's another example of my essay question prompt around 2014. And what I learned is that students didn't necessarily know what to do with evidence or even what it is. So I took that rubric and sat back and said, you know what? So how do scientists do this? They can't do this part until they do the preliminary part, which is to make sense of the data. And maybe we've all assumed that students can do that when they walk into our class. So I decided to test that assumption essentially and add it into my instruction in more informal ways than this project does at this point, to have students work on their skills in describing trends and patterns in the data and reading graphs, et cetera. So I added a component to that rubric that you see. And my preliminary and sort of informal results were positive. So it encouraged me to continue. And a lot of things happened in subsequent semesters, and it resulted in the opportunity for this IUS grant. So we've included now a learning scientist with this, another instructor who is doing a similar sort of thing in her class, and other instructors who are using their fantastic, more traditional lecturing styles as comparison sections. So we use our introductory oceanography course at Rider as many sections that are offered each semester in the life of this grant, which was 3 years, but we got an extension for 1 year. Each class is about 30 students. They include freshmen to seniors, science and non-science majors, and I'd say overall the majority are non-science majors taking the course for gen ed requirements. The sections are distinguished from each other. We have Dr. Smalley and myself teaching what we call intervention sections, where we're utilizing the lessons that we've developed and assessing students' growth, we hope, in those courses, and comparing same assessment data with lecture sections where students are given the same surveys and the same exam questions, just not the lessons, and to see how they compare, to see if our hypothesis that if we incorporate data literacy skills development in a particular way, that they will be better able to construct scientific explanations. This is the set of data that we've been collecting through the life of the grant. I can't tell you about all of it, and we're still really in the process of entering data and analyzing them. We have finished collecting student work. So today I'm just going to give you some results about exam questions and pre and post surveys, including 3 types. One is an ocean concepts knowledge survey, which we had to develop for this project ourselves because we had 4 different instructors doing this, and we couldn't ask questions on the survey that weren't addressed in those different sections. And we modified 2 published surveys called the Visualization Literacy Assessment and the Lawson's Classroom Test of Scientific Reasoning. And our goal here was to make sure that we attempting to determine if students' abilities in data literacy improved in the intervention classes at least, and whether their scientific reasoning improved, which was really our end goal, is to improve their reasoning. We had to modify this simply by reducing the number of questions because of survey fatigue we detected in our experimental semester with all of this. And so we'll address those, I guess the issues around modifying these published and vetted tools when we finish our results. So we'll see data for 4 semesters, and we will be adding 2 more semesters by the time we're finished our analysis. So we first need to come up with some data visualizations or experiences with data. So this is one of several sets that we created. This is a static view of a widget that students have access to, and beneath each of these, or towards the bottom of each of these images, you'll see the link for the actual widget. And at the end, we have a QR code and URL to access all of the widgets. On the sides, I've put the location of where you can find the original data if you're so interested. So in this example, we're asking students to try and explain ultimately the relationship between wind speed and wave height using real data collected by the OOI program. And hopefully you can see that while this is, if you know the concepts behind this, is a beautiful data set, it's messy and it's got lots of variations in it that students have to develop sort of a tolerance for and sort of see through the small scale variations, et cetera. Each of these widgets are interactive. So for example, this one, they can grab these little handles and zoom in and out of the x-axis. And when they do that, usually the y-axis change in scale. So they have to notice that and deal with that. And in this case, they can turn different data sets off and on. So they can look at them all, or they can look at one or two compared to each other, et cetera. Here's another data set with related to plate tectonics and sort of the changes in ocean basins in our oceanography class. And in this case, it's a map view. So again, in oceanography, we're looking at all sorts of data visualizations. And if students are not comfortable or familiar with any of them, introducing them to very quickly a whole variety of them that are pretty sophisticated, I think requires some attention that perhaps at least I hadn't done in the past. In this data widget, they can turn off these different data layers here. They can zoom in and out. We assign them a particular location for their in-class work and give them a task to respond to figure out the plate boundary type in this case. Another example, and these are sort of graphs that break the rules when you have an XY graph, right? So oceanographers like to plot their data that shows change in a particular parameter from the surface down, using the y-axis going down and the change in the variable on the y-axis versus the x-axis. In this case, they can toggle off and on the three different locations. The axes don't change in this case, so there's less interaction opportunity here. So I don't mean to imply that, you know, traditional oceanography classes and textbooks, et cetera, don't have data sets. They certainly do. And this is a beautiful one for a very complicated topic, which we use and address at the end of the semester. But it's beautifully cleaned up and sort of, in essence, an average of what really occurs and isn't a real data set. So we, again, include a level of toleration around messy data, real world data sets. And so here is some of the view of this particular widget where you can turn off and on the different variables and you can highlight the different seasons. So we ask them to look at summer or winter, and so they can see what we mean by the beginning of summer and end of summer, et cetera. So there's a lot of interaction for the students. And you can also grab the handles and zoom in and out on the x-axis as well. So once we had our plan for particular data visualizations and data sets, we needed to attach them to a series of steps in our classroom that helps them learn the science behind this and guides them to look at the data set, describe patterns in them, and then draw some conclusions from that data set, given whatever prompt we ask them, and explain them. And in our explanations, we're looking for the use of evidence that includes descriptions of patterns and trends and anomalies even, as well as specific quantitative data points, and attach them or tie them to their understanding of the relative science concepts. So those are introduced in different ways in each of our four instructors' classes, from lecturing in the comparison classes to some combination of lecture and inquiry-based lessons, et cetera, initially, and then they're guided to do these steps. I have some color coding here because we use it actually with our students and with some of our illustrations that you'll see next, to show where evidence shows up, that's in yellow, where conclusions show up, that's in pink, and to show where their understanding, the text of their understanding of relevant science concepts comes in blue, and any one or two words that tie evidence to their understanding. And when we did this, we learned some really interesting things and how students struggle to even know the difference between evidence and science concepts. So to guide us in designing our lesson plans, we used a variety of resources, but this one was fairly prominent. This is one way of illustrating sort of a progression in the development of data literacy skills. In the resources that you'll get, there's a WAVES data study lesson plan that's a PDF that is annotated to show you where we've included some of these steps in case that's helpful for you. And this is what we've done in almost all of these, if not all of these, in each of our lesson plans that you'll have access to. We can't do it all, of course, and probably do some a little bit more or differently in different lessons, but we've tried to cover the bases to develop their skills. And then finally, we adapted that K through 12 rubric, the claim, evidence, and reasoning rubric, to add, to not only amp it up a bit, of course, for college level courses, but to add an initial component, and that is data description, so that we can guide students to do this work and then assess that work. And again, you can see the color coding here from yellow for data and evidence to pink with the conclusions they draw or claims, the use of their evidence in their explanation, and their reasoning, which is a combination of the science concepts and evidence attached to them to support their claim. So I'm going to show you sort of a very practical expression of the results of this work, and that is what it looks like. But before I do that, let me just tell you about our summative assessment tools that we use. These are our exam questions. There are 3 per semester in all sections: intervention and comparison. And these are essentially the questions. I want you to note, of course, they're about different concepts. And so it gets a little challenging to compare the results from one to the next to the next. So comparing or looking at growth over the semester gets a little tricky. And we're grappling with that right now with our analyses, and we'll hopefully make sense of it all in the end. The third, so we have something about plate tectonics and determining a plate boundary type, understanding and expressing the relationship between wind speed and wave height, and determining what controls primary production in the ocean in the winter season. This last one is really, in the end, a comprehensive test question that requires students to use concepts from the very beginning of the semester, or nearly so, depending on the organization of a course, and tie it together. So it's a particularly hard one. And so when you see the results, you might see a drop in the student performance, and we think it's related to that. So here's my practical example in case you're saying, this is interesting, maybe I'd like to know more about it. This is one student example from their first exam question to their third exam question, with the ratings for using the DCER, data descriptions, claim, evidence, and reasoning. And I've done the color coding here. I have not asked the students to do this because that's too much to ask an exam. They do actually do it in the work they do in the class, though. And what I'd like you to see is there's a whole lot more blue on the right? That's the inclusion of more science concepts they've finally gotten. This student has finally gotten that. I can't just tell you the data. I need to attach it to my understanding of the science concepts. And so the total score, if you combine all these for this student, is essentially doubled from the beginning to the end. This doesn't happen for every student, of course, and we learn a lot about what the confusions are and how to distinguish one thing from another. We don't have a lot of time to talk about that today, but perhaps in discussion, we can reveal more of that. Okay, so here are some actual results. So this includes 4 semesters. We still need 2 semesters of data to add to this. And we've dissected the different components using that rubric and combined some of them in these 2 different graphs. And what I hope you can see here is that aside from making the claim for 2 of the 3 exams, in all exam questions for all components of the rubric that we use, the intervention class does a better job and is statistically significant as compared to the comparison sections. And if we combine the claim, evidence, and reasoning, so leave out the data description, which is ultimately what as a goal for me, I'm looking for my students to be able to do, again, the same result, statistically significant difference between the intervention and the comparison classes, and the same for the total score. What's really interesting is that aside from that third test question, that's pretty complicated. Interestingly, the comparison students are similarly able to answer that or make a claim in response to the prompts, as well as into intervention classes, so they can get it right in many cases, but explaining it is much more difficult for the comparison classes. So here are some pre and post surveys. So again, we did an ocean concepts knowledge survey, and these are kind of cool results. Essentially, what we can say here at this point, given our preliminary analysis, is that in both cases, the students improve their knowledge of the science concepts that we know are addressed in all sections, but the intervention classes improve more, essentially, right? And so that was another hypothesis of ours, that if we work with students to develop their understanding by writing and composing and revising explanations using evidence and the science concepts attached to them, that they would actually develop a deeper understanding and a better understanding of the science concepts across the board. And so that seems to be the case. The VLAT, the Visualization Literacy Assessment Test, and the Lawson's Classroom Test of Scientific Reasoning are a little confusing for us. And so again, we're kind of hoping with this additional semesters, we could make more sense of these. So we're scratching our heads a little bit. It appears that for the Visualization Literacy Assessment, the intervention group and the comparison groups are not statistically different, and have decreased a little, with the comparison group actually dropping a little bit. And so we have some ideas of why that might be, and I'll summarize that in a second. And in the Lawson's Classroom Test of Scientific Reasoning, there was no significant difference for either of the group either. So in conclusion, in particular for the last part, we're thinking maybe because we're comparing the survey responses at the beginning and the end, and these are essentially assignments, they're not tests for students. In reality, not every student actually does the work, right? But maybe at the end of the semester, there's end of semester fatigue. There are 3 surveys that they respond to a little differently in each class. At the end of the semester, in addition to course evaluation, maybe that's just too much for some students. We have to think seriously about whether the tests are measuring the skills that we've been targeting. And it's possible that in one semester, we might not improve these particular skills, data visualization, scientific reasoning, although we do seem to show that they can improve their scientific explanations, which we are defining as scientific reasoning. So it might be that students, particularly in the comparison sections, where they're just given the assessments without instruction around them, just might become more confused about it, as opposed to improve their use of them, kind of thing. So in the end, it looks so far that if a goal of a course is to strengthen scientific reasoning, this method seems to work, although we have some mixed results around these surveys that we're using. This QR code that we have here will give you access to, and the URL to, all of those data visualizations, which are currently on a Rutgers website. We're working on and just the visualizations, the widgets themselves, we're currently working on a website that will include more information about the project and access to resources, et cetera, and that will be through Rider University. And if you're interested in the same sort of activities, these 2 resources are also really good sources. The OI Ocean Data Labs project, which includes individual data labs as shown here, but also some of those were pulled into and created a lab manual that has some intentional progression of development of skills, et cetera. And also the EDDI program has done a similar sort of thing, in particular around data literacy. So those are also additional resources. And again, these are 2 programs that influence the work that we do. And finally, I'll mention that if you have any interest in this sort of thing, we'll be presenting similar information and also guide some attendees to do some work on their own in a workshop at the Earth Educators Rendezvous in Philadelphia in July, and present more and hopefully more complete set of results in a poster after that workshop in July. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Browne. Now we are going to transition to our breakout sessions for Q&A and further discussion. Breakout rooms are self-assigned and organized by speaker. I'm going to ask my colleague Drew to go ahead and open up those breakout rooms now. You should see a pop-up on your screen allowing you to select a breakout room. If you don't see that pop-up, you can navigate to the bottom of your screen and select the breakout rooms button and click the room you'd like to enter. If you're running an older version of Zoom and don't see the breakout button, please post in the chat which speaker's room you'd like to enter and we will assign you to that room. We're going to call you back to the larger group around 3:25 and hope you all have a lovely discussion. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a good discussion in the Q&A part of this webinar. I'm wondering if we could get our speakers to share a quick 1-minute recap of what your group discussed. And we could start, if you don't mind, with Dr. Dogucu.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I'm so thankful that we had an opportunity to exchange ideas because it's so much better than giving talks alone. So our group has discussed about different needs of students from their own experiences, like accessibility needs. We've had few people teaching students. For instance, one person taught somebody without an arm. And then similarly, when we talk about teaching accessibility, we had a participant who is also teaching motor accessibility because they teach a lot of dashboards. So we discussed about whatever was missing from the talk and how, so that we can learn from each other. And another thing we discussed was whatever was in the talk, can we take it to our own classrooms and our own curriculum and our own assessment? So that's how we went.
Great. Dr. Browne?
Yeah, so we had, I'd say, sort of two categories of questions and conversations. One was, if I could call it, the mechanics of how we did this and the details, and sort of digging down into the details of how we pulled it off and what other data or results we have. And the other was, I wonder questions, like I wonder about, did you notice or did you think about, kind of thing. And of course, we didn't do some of those things, if not any of those things, but they were so valuable because it makes me think again differently about what we've done so far, the data we've collected, and how we might be able to look at the data a little differently than we had already planned. So thank you for those questions.
Well, great. Before we depart, I would like to thank our speakers once again for their wonderful work and their all the work that went into putting this presentation together. To the rest of the AAAS IU's team and to all of you who are able to join and participate in this workshop today. We have a survey link, which we are posting in the chat and we'll send via email. The survey should only take a few minutes and we would really love to get your feedback. Additionally, a recording of the presentation will be posted on our website and emailed to you in the coming days. Again, thank you all for joining us, and we hope we'll see you next month at our workshop, using artificial intelligence to enhance learning for all students with Dr. Nargis Nagrozi and Dr. Ebekuban Asamobuni on Wednesday, May 22nd. As always, we look forward to engaging with you and learning from you and from our AAAS IU's team. Please take care.